Welcome back, everybody. This is not a Malazan video. Today we're gonna talk about The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie, and I'll tell you why and all of the other stuff. So let's do that. Cheers. All right. So basically, I read the first Law trilogy, all three books, around a decade ago, over a decade ago. I mean, I don't know exactly when I read them, but it must have been somewhere around 2005-ish. Maybe a bit later, but definitely before 2008. I know that. That's the point. And then I never read them again because I liked them well enough at the time, but I just never felt, pushed to reread them. I now am rereading them because I have something in mind for another video, and I felt it would be smart to actually reread the damn things. And since I did that, I also thought, why not use that fact that I reread them to do a small, like, rambling kind of, I don't want to call it a review kind of thing, because come on, those books have been out for almost 2 decades now, and everyone knows about them. Every booktuber has made their own review about it, so I could, you don't need me to tell you how good those books are. So instead, I'm gonna tell you what I don't like about them, because and have a look at my experience as a rereader after like 15 years or however long it was when I first read them. Because obviously I, as a reader, have changed over that time. I've read a ton more books since then. My appreciation for specific aspects of books has maybe changed over time. I'm certainly a more conscious reader at this point, and the question is, does the first law stand the test of time? At least my test of time. The answer is, well, sorta. So yes, there will be full spoilers in this. I feel at this point, everyone and their dogs know the book, or at least have heard about it, and the need for spoiler freeness is basically over, and I don't plan to actually tell you stuff. I mean, the things I want to talk about are not things that can be done without spoilers. So if you were expecting a spoiler-free one, then that's unfortunately not the case here. But let's look at a few things that Abercrombie still does very well, and that I still appreciate about it. And then let's look at the stuff that I don't like that much anymore. All right. So first of all, the title is glorious. The quote is also glorious. The blade itself incites to deeds of violence, which is apparently a quote from Homer from the Odyssey, although I can't remember it from there when I last read the Odyssey, but Anyway, that's the point there. The entire way the book is written, the chapter titles, chapter headings, quotes in front of part 1 and part 2, all of that is very stylish. It's cool. It's well done. It grips. That's just like really well done in a way that I feel a lot of fantasy authors before that didn't go about it. This reads rather modern, at least on that level. Like the way it's made up, it comes across as modern, as pushing boundaries and stuff like that. Although, if that promise is fulfilled once you go beyond these like trappings, the headings and stuff like that, is another question. I feel that it's sort of not really fulfilling those promises of being like an slightly edgy, pushing boundaries kind of modern kind of fantasy story, because in the end there's a lot of like tropes and stuff in there again. So what else is good about it? Certainly, Abercrombie is a master of writing snappy dialogue. He's really good at these like snappy dialogues. There is this like dry sense of humor in there, the irony. It's that part is just really really good. And I remember like ages ago I read on like some of his like blogs about how he's writing and how he's editing his stuff from draft to draft, and that shows. He's like he writes a lot and then he pares down. He said that he's paring down the language. He's like removing all the words that he feels are unnecessary, and that comes across. It's a lean prose in a way, at least in the dialogues, and the rest of the prose not so much. But in the dialogue, that just is really good, and I feel that comes also from, in a way, I guess, the influence of television. As far as I know, Abercrombie worked in television, like more like cutting, I think, and editing stuff. But anyway, there is a feeling in the books in general. There is a feeling of the way scenes are laid out. It's a very like cinematic or television, like a visual way things are laid out, and the dialogues are very much the kind of dialogue that you would get in a TV show, which I feel is different from the dialogue you usually read in, not always, but often read in books. Like written dialogue often feels, at least to me, feels slightly different than spoken dialogue in movies in a way, because obviously you have in movies you have other like ways to purvey to bring emotions across and stuff like that. So ideally you can pare down the actual words much more than you can within a written dialogue, where you have to bring across all these other aspects, these other facets of a scene as well. And yes, you can just put all of that in like a long series of adjectives in front of your dialogue, but these are no longer the 1930s pulp novels, so we don't do that anymore. We have to find other ways to do that. So that's what I mean when I say it feels more like a TV dialogue than actual like written dialogue in a way. And that's good. I mean, that part is really good. I give him that, and I really enjoyed it this time around as well. Like especially like the way the inner monologue of someone like Logan Nine Fingers. That bit is just very cool. In general, characters are like the other part there. Like at least Logan as a character, I enjoyed this time around. Again, it's fun to I guess the problem there is that he is written as a very likable character, the gruff, realistic, hard fighting man who doesn't want to fight. There is a lot about these characters that makes a lot of people like them, but with Logan, there's enough like self irony in a way in there that I appreciated that here. With the other like main characters, I feel it's a bit more complicated. Sandan Glokta is someone where I feel the self-hatred, self-loathing, and thus lashing out kind of bit that comes his with his being crippled is maybe overplayed a couple of times in a way that I personally found difficult to get to. I mean, I might go into that like after I finish the entire trilogy again and look at how Abercrombie deals with a disability in a way there that might be interesting to look at as well. Although I already have other things that I want to talk about when it comes to Glokta. So yeah, I'm not quite as happy with him as a character. I'm even less a fan of Giselle Dan Luther. I mean, he's just an arrogant prick, and I get that bit. But that doesn't mean I have to like the character. It's kind of well done, although it feels a bit cliched in a way. I mean, all of these characters, especially when it comes to like the secondary or not like real viewpoint characters, some of those felt very flat to me this time around. It's like the arch lector of the Inquisition, Salt. He comes across almost as a caricature at this point for me. It's like that's not good, right? That's not good characterization in a way. It's just like it ticks off all the boxes of a cliche in a way. And I feel that with Giselle Dan Luther, that also shows in a way. That also shows in a way there. It gets even worse with someone like Pharaoh Melgen, who is not a good character. In like, didn't I couldn't connect with him with her there at all. The way she's, I mean, maybe that was the plan, but it seems that her characterization is even more one-dimensional. It's basically just hate. And yes, you can obviously make the argument that someone escaping from slavery and so forth would be filled by hate, mostly hate. But there's like nothing else to her, right? There's nothing else. And that makes it so boring after a time. It's like, yeah, so Pharaoh goes somewhere, she's angry at everyone, she's pissed off at everyone, she wants to kill everyone. So what? And after like the second chapter, I'm like, could we just switch? Could we skip her parts? So there's that. Major West, I do kind of get behind his, like, him trying to survive in that kind of society that is very stratified, and he's from the lower classes, and he has to deal with that all the time. That I do get that. That will probably lead us to the next point, which is probably like my biggest issue with the first law this time round. When we come to the grimdark discussion. What else? I guess an interesting character in a way is his sister, probably like the only, at least semi-realistic female character in this first book. In general, there's almost no female characters in this book. I mean, you could probably argue that it's basically about mostly about soldiers, and thus in a at least in this world, it's a very like, there is a lot of gender separation there, unlike, for example, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where everybody can be a soldier. This time, I mean, people give, I don't know, Tolkien shit for having not a single female character in The Hobbit, and not that many in Lord of the Rings. But when you look at the first law here, it's like, how many female characters are in there? There's Addie West, whom I would consider a full character. There's Pharaoh Melgen, second character, and then there's, I don't know, near the end, that one female practical, Vitari. That's maybe half a character at this point. There is, what's her name? Therese, the princess that's supposed to marry the crown prince. That's like another quarter character because she only shows up in like 2 scenes. And then there is that other girl, like the sister of, or cousin or whatever, of one of the officers that's it. That's not even like 5 full female characters in this entire book. There's like mention of like 2 more females, I guess, and that's it. And that's for a book written around 2000. That's pretty shocking, I guess, in a way. I mean, I'm not, I just wanted to point it out as the point. I'm not going to start like a big gender debate here about this. I just felt it's kind of amazing that there's basically only men in this book. Everywhere it's only guys doing guys things. And, it kind of makes a little bit of like a note of that near the end when Glocta is talking to Addie West about the fact about promiscuity for men being apparently a good thing, and for women being frowned upon in a way. He does that, but it goes nowhere. So let's look at the next thing that I want to talk about that I have problems with. Is like the subversion of tropes sometimes works, but mostly it doesn't. So the idea of like Bias as the first of the Magi not coming across as the wise wizard, and actually having to them actually having to get like theater costumes so they get taken seriously. That's a cool idea to play with these cliches and that we know from fantasy literature. That's cool. But beyond that, as I said, like the arch-lector of the Inquisition comes across as a cliche. The Inquisition in general is rather a cliche and doesn't upturn any or subvert any tropes, really. There's just a lot of that stuff feels rather cliche. Now, that might just be also that because the world building in this book, at least, is still very, very narrow. We don't get much information about this world. We have like basically nothing. We have and that's interesting. We have like no information about the world, about its history. There's no big info dumps, but we don't get anything. What he does instead, what Abercrombie does instead, that brings me to another problem is that he chooses rather ringing names that carry a lot of meaning in a way. It's like we basically like places and language that he uses there that bring a lot of character that we then fill in with our own thoughts and memories or knowledge of our world in a way. It's like, yeah, the north is grim and grim and dark, and I don't know, everyone is dirty and always running around in the mud and all of that. And then you have this place that is sort of like the Middle East or what have you, and you have this place that seems to be sort of Asian in a way. And you have this other place with these free cities in Styria, which seems to be rather Mediterranean Italian from what I can tell. That's because I think like free city states sounds like medieval Italy to me. But that's exactly the point. It's like he drops these few hints and we fill out the blanks, which is, it's clever, but it comes to a couple of problems that I have. One, the name Styria, because that's the place in our world, and I've been there. I don't know if naming your fantasy continent like the region between Austria and Slovenia is that clever an idea. I don't know. And there's a bunch of those, but the main issue there is that it leaves you open for a lot of stereotypes and problematic stereotypes. And the thing I mean here is, and from my memory, it gets even worse in Before They're Hanged, is the idea of the evil empire of Gurkel being, because we don't have much information about it, but being sort of portrayed as a Middle Eastern country. Add to that the fanatic religion in a way with the prophet and everything. That just leaves a very bitter taste in my mouth. It's like, oh, look, we are not actually doing full-blown Islamophobia here because it's obviously not Islam, but a bit. And that's something that I found rather disturbing this time around. It's just like, I don't mind having, it's fantasy. I don't mind having an evil empire. I don't even mind having an evil empire with a, which is sort of a theocracy. I don't even mind them being like religious fanatics. All of that's fine, but because of the way that Abercrombie does not give us information about the empire apart from there's deserts and people have darker skin and it's sort of in the south, and I put some cliches in there like these small bits about like the one guy from Gurkel having these gold earrings, and that's just like a bit too much because it lets the place look like a really bad cliche of a Middle Eastern Islamic country, and that made me uncomfortable is what I'm trying to say here. And I feel I don't want to say that was I feel it's not Abercrombie's intention to do that, but it leaves it open for people to think that way, to evoke these images because of the way he writes his world. He does his world building, which is basically not giving us much information. In a way, it's something that you can also, I feel, kind of point a finger at Glenn Cook with the Black Company, or what's this other the Dread Empire. That's the series I meant. Which does the same thing, but it's like, I don't know, 40 years old at this point, from 1980 or whenever he wrote that. I don't know, 70s or 80s is when Cook wrote the Dread Empire series. And it shows in that way. But I thought we were like beyond using these like really cliche kind of things there. Okay, so that's another problem that I have with the first law this time round. It's like it it just, I don't know, could have been handled better is what I'm trying to say. Now we come to the last point for me. The last point being the grimdark. The grimdark. Now, I've talked a lot about grimdark before, and I don't want to get too deeply in that discussion right now. But what I see here is the world of the first law, at least the world of the Union there, is not a nice place. It is very classist. It has rigid class structures. Everything sucks, basically, if you're, yeah, if you're not a nobleman. We have this like rigid class structure. We have like very strict sort of morals when it comes to gender roles and shit like that. We have all of these things that make this not a nice place to be. And we see basically everyone in, like everyone in those characters having their issues with that system. Well, everyone, like Giselle and Luther, not so much. But the point is, nobody does anything about it. They're not even, there's not even a plan to do something about it. People might not be happy with the way things are working, but everyone accepts the rules, becomes a fucking hypocrite, and just like walks around those rules where they can and ignores them where they can, manipulates and all that shit. But no one even thinks of like changing society in a way. That's like super cynical to me. It's like when you compare it to what I said last week about the steel remains, where society is also fucked up, and we will have to talk about the monotheism in the steel remains when I go back to talking about the cold commands and dark defiles, because the thing I just said about Gurkel can also be said about the Empire, and at least partly about the Empire there, but we'll see. Anyway, my point being, no one even decides to just burn the entire thing down. No, everyone just accepts that the world is fucked and try to make their way as best as possible through that. And that is, interesting and nice for a bit, and can certainly be entertaining in parts because of Abercrombie's writing style, which I, once again, I do enjoy it, although I feel that some of his prose in this first book, especially when when we're not too fully in the mind of one of our characters with like an ongoing inner monologue, which we have a lot in here. Sometimes it gets too flowery by being too lighthearted, too ironic in a way, and too ornate sometimes when it comes to descriptions of places in a way. So I feel that the really cool, like clipped style of dialogue sometimes jars for me a bit with the way that some of the other like descriptions suddenly become too flowery and too much like your old-timey Tolkien kind style of writing, which I guess is okay because this is like Abercrombie's first book, and from what I remember from my readings of the the standalone novels, that stuff got better over time. I feel I enjoyed Red Country and the Heroes a lot more in my memory. I'll probably go and reread them as well. And I have not yet started on the new trilogy. I'll do that whenever the last book comes out, and then I'll go through all three of those. But my point being that the prose there is, in a way, not always working out that well. But yeah, so basically what we have is, and to sum it all up, I still think it's a solid debut novel. It does a few things really well. The dialogue and the dialogue and chapter headings and stuff like that. That's just really cool. The rest is a mixed bag. Some of the characters being rather flat. The lack of female characters is something that I found that I realized took more exception to this time around. Same with the fact that the way the Empire is portrayed can come across as Islamophobic or whatever in that direction. I don't want to level allegations of Orientalism just yet, but it's a bit of a problem there. Plus, the fact that the society portrayed is fucked up and no one even wants or thinks about doing something about it leaves me a bit bored because it's very I don't have, I'm looking for a word there. Let me think. Jaded is, I guess, the word I was looking for. The approach, it comes across as a jaded worldview that comes out of that book in a way because no one does anything. It's like life's shit. We have to live with it the best we can, and don't even think about making things better or burning them all down. And that's, now that I've read stuff like The Steel Remains, where burning it down is the driving anger is something that I really appreciated there. And I'm missing any kind of, I guess that's the point. I'm missing any kind of backbone in the author, like moral backbone in a way that, not in the author as a person. Obviously, I have no idea about Joe Abercrombie. He seems to be a rather cool guy, but the book just doesn't have any. Yeah, it doesn't have any moral impetus whatsoever, and that in itself is not a problem. But I rather appreciate it when books do have some kind of do something in that line, which is why I appreciate stuff like, as I said, The Steel Remains, like the Land Fit for Heroes trilogy, or the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and some of the other stuff, like, I don't know, Robin Hobbs in some of her stuff. And obviously more like, your Cameron Hurleys and newer fantasy in that regard. But that being said, I still enjoyed it. It was fun. I feel that it could have been done better, and there's a lot of problems with it, and it's definitely not the best thing since sliced bread being or whatever. So my rereading, I guess, was semi-successful. I didn't enjoy it as much now because I've read more. It's not exactly as edgy or whatever, what have you, as I remembered it to be, or as I guess some people give it the reputation of. It's just, it's a solid book with a lot of problems when it comes to depiction, or like even like representation of female characters, and the way the world building is handled. All right, so that's that for today. I'll be back tomorrow with Reaper's Gale stuff, and we'll see where things go from there. Until then, have a great Sunday evening. Cheers.